Personal background is that I come from an enterprise software background. So I started a company called Live Loop. We did keystroke by keystroke document collaboration. I sold that company to Microsoft in 2015, worked at Microsoft for a number of years in first in real-time collaboration and then in AI assisted design tools. And so I came to the VR industry from the enterprise side, which was after a year and a half of being in the pandemic, thinking, why is it so tough to like wake up in the morning and get on video calls with my team? Um, yeah, it just felt like such a drag. And I used to drive two to 2.5 hours a day to get to the office and back. And I would rather do that than just spend all day on Zoom with people. And so that's how I started breaking that down into first principles and saying, what is it that an office provides? And a lot of that is spatial computing and what I call our spatial brain. You know, our brain is built for 3 dimensions, um, and so a lot of the sensation and feeling of existing in physical space can only exist when you tap into that spatial brain. So that's how I started about thinking about VR. Um, and that's why I think I come to VR AR from a more enterprise angle. You know, I'm not a gamer. You know, the last time I seriously played a game was Super Mario Brothers 3 on the NES, you know, back when I was in elementary school. So I come at this from definitely from the enterprise side. There's a tremendous number of opportunities. Our VR AR investing is more tilted towards enterprise. Of course, we have gaming and consumer investments as well, but that's kind of the lens through which I see a lot of this.
Yeah, we see that gap in the market as well. That's kind of the angle we're taking with Metaverse Monday as a publication. I don't come from a gaming background. The thing that motivated me was the idea that I could have unlimited screens and work from remote, even back in the Envelop VR days, which is like 2016. That was a key product back then. So can you talk about your future vision for where this is going and what are the investments you're looking to fund that help us get there?
I wouldn't say we have a coherent vision of the future. I think that's what the founders build, right? I don't think it's VCs who should paint visions of the future and then ask founders to build them. I think founders come to us with their visions of the future and we look to support them. Um, I I am very, very excited for the introduction of the Apple Vision Pro and what it will do for the market. Um, you know, I think that the industry has been dominated by Meta, right? Um, Oculus Oculus was the moment that kicked this industry off, right? And Oculus came out and Palmer, you know, 18 years old, came out with the VR headset that was simultaneously the cheapest and the best VR headset, both by an order of magnitude. So really like up leveled the headset market by, you know, like 100x overnight. Um, and I think it's been great that Meta and Mark Zuckerberg personally have, you know, expressed such deep belief in this market. The scale of the investment and just the single-mindedness of it, you know, renaming the company to Meta, taking this on as, you know, his personal, you know, vision of what can exist here. But I think there's a lot of limitations that Meta has, right? Number one is that its overall brand perception. If you look at the Facebook portal, probably the best consumer electronics I've ever used, but it didn't take off. I think there's a trust problem with Facebook. I think there's a trust problem with Zuckerberg personally. I think they're having trouble establishing VR as something other than like something that kids use for gaming. And so I think that Apple has the opportunity to show the world and will show the world why VR and AR is something that's relevant to you. You know, this isn't just something that you get for your nephew. And this is something that is cool and fun and not, something for dweebs. So I think that that will do a lot to help people put the headset on for the first time with a sense of, hey, this could be something that I could use for my professional life, for my personal life, and for recreation, not just gaming, but just socializing, and just anything we do, right? So I'm excited for the enterprise applications, for the consumer applications, and also for the medical applications, because there's a huge segment there that I think, there's Dr. Brennan Spiegel and, Professor Bailenson at Stanford. They've come up with some really amazing stuff, some impacts that VR and AR can have on people's lives, on their health, applied VR and limbics, and one of our companies, Karuna Labs. There's an incredible set of things in digital health that are largely new, and are pretty exciting.
Just on your like comments there about how it kind of sits currently at this subset between VR for enterprise and VR for gaming, and at the moment we don't really have arguably a need for anything in the middle there. Do you think that even as Apple come to the market, that VR actually stays for gaming on one side and enterprise on the other, and can it exist like that, or does it need to find this mainstream middle ground, or are the industries use cases and then the gaming use cases at either end of the spectrum big enough for it to continue?
Yeah, from the enterprise use cases, we've already seen tailored, niche, very specific enterprise use cases, and they've been there for like 30, 40 years, right? So how long has VR been used in flight training, pilot training?
Right.
40. How long has VR been used in automotive design? 40 years, right? Back to Jaron Lanier, it didn't like start and then stop and then restart with Oculus. It was being used that whole time, but in very narrowly focused environments, automotive design, military, medical training, things like that. So what you see today is that a lot of those businesses that do these niche, highly vertical applications, have gotten the most amount of early traction. So we have a company, Oso VR, that trains surgeons in VR, but not with any fancy equipment, with an Oculus Quest 2 and the standard Oculus controllers. And, is it like holding a scalpel? No, but you practice the whole workflow of the surgery, opening what needs to be opened, and not to get too graphic here, but, just practicing the hand motions and the logistics and the tool use of the surgery. And they have a study that shows that using OSO improves the performance of a surgeon by 230%. So the applications in the enterprise have long been known. The improvements are massive, and those applications are already there. So there's fast food restaurants doing new employee training. There's OSO. There's Resolve, which is doing data center planning in VR. But then what I think you're starting to see right now is horizontal enterprise applications of VR. So we are investors in a company called Arthur, which is essentially a Zoom for VR, but I don't want to call it a Zoom for VR because the experience of meeting in VR is much more powerful and intimate and collaborative than meeting over Zoom. So like you cannot have a 15-person conversation over Zoom, but you can have a 15-person conversation in Arthur. And that's because of, what and what I know and what the Arthur users know, but it's something that the broader, Fortune 500 CEO base doesn't know yet. And Arthur is being used in Fortune 500 board meetings today, because it is a relatively unknown market. It requires a lot of high touch, and because it requires a lot of high touch, Arthur right now is mostly focused on the very high end, Fortune 500 board meetings or senior leadership meetings. This is going to become more and more mainstream. And and it's happening right now with Arthur. The Fortune 500 companies are seeing their board meet in VR, and then they're saying, okay, well, let's bring the senior execs in and meet with them. Then it's like the next layer of management gets into the next meeting with Arthur. And eventually this will be the way that people do business. And so I think that the niche is already there. And it's not just in business, it's in things like education. So Prisms, which is doing math education in VR and achieving much better results than standard, class online videos. But I think there's those horizontal applications that will be like the mainstream driver of VR, AR, spatial computing, whatever you want to call it, because there's going to be, a Slack, a Zoom, a Google Docs. These are going to exist in VR, right? It will, because if you're collaboratively working with someone, it will be more effective to do so in VR with them. And I honestly think that it's going to do a lot to solve the remote work problem. I think, people went remote because they were forced to, and then they came back, and now there's a big push to return to the office because people are finding that Zoom just doesn't cut it. Well, I think once people start using Arthur, once the Vision Pro gets, more traction, once more horizontal business applications are built in 3D, I think the scale is going to tilt back, and people are going to say, okay, we had to come back to the office because the technology and the business processes weren't where we needed to be, but now we have the technology to do that. And so that's what I think the Vision Pro can really accelerate, is mainstream mass market applications of VR and AR.
Can you talk about some of the specific pitfalls with Arthur and how that applies to the overall industry? Because I built a virtual meetings platform for many years, very similar to Arthur. And so from a first person perspective, like I saw how difficult it is to onboard and deploy executives into VR, how difficult it is to make sure that their headsets charged before a meeting, which can throw off a whole board meeting. So can you maybe talk about like how are they mitigating those issues, and is it just a waiting game for Apple?
So the way that Arthur is mitigating these issues is with a lot of work, right? And so they are very high touch, and they are there's a lot of work on the engineering side, and there's a lot of work on the actual customer success side. And a lot of companies in the virtual meeting space don't have the right kind of background in working with Fortune 500s to know what needs to be done there. That when you get a SOC 2 audit request, you can't just kind of ignore it. You gotta be super buttoned up. You have to have all the right integrations. You have to know what Microsoft Active Directory is, and you need to integrate with it. These kinds of things are what I feel like is there's people in the VR world who are coming from an Unreal or Unity background, and they're game devs, and they're like, I'm going to build this thing in VR, and they're thinking all about the spatial interactions and the controls, and they're thinking about tearing and 90 hertz and 120 hertz, and they're talking about getting the last 3 milliseconds latency out of it, and that's all important. But the enterprise software world works on different quality parameters, right? And I think it is what's happening now, and what's important for the industry to move forward is people are coming um, from both industries and working together. Because I think when you have the game devs come in, they don't really have the background or priorities to say, hey, we need to make sure that we have Active Directory integration. Like, that's not something that's on the roadmap of someone who comes from the gaming world. And when you come from the business software SaaS world, from someone who's been working at Slack or someone who's been working at Datadog or something, you know, PII, GDPR compliance, you know, Active Directory, you know, all that stuff, SOC 2, that's all top of mind. Everyone realizes how important that stuff is. And so I think you're seeing now, and what you will see going forward, is it will take both of those kinds of experience to make a company successful. The domain knowledge of the business problem you're trying to solve, and the experience with VR, AR, 3D, and all the peculiarities. You know, designing 3D software is nothing like designing 2D software, and so you do need to have that experience. I'll give you an example. Anurupa Ganguly, who's the CEO and founder of Prisms, she didn't have any game dev, VR, 3D, any kind of spatial computing background when she started the company. She had degrees in computer science from MIT, but no specific experience in 3D. Her domain expertise was in education, and she ran the math curriculum for New York City public schools, the middle school math curriculum. And so she had a tremendous amount of domain knowledge about what it would take to build and sell a better math education system in VR. And then she was able to build the team with the right experience who had that 3D and had that VR experience. And Apple will bring more and more people with domain expertise into spatial computing. So I think Apple will make it obvious that this is a market I need to be thinking about.
I'll just cut in real quick and then let Lori ask the next question. But I think you're very wise to talk about this idea of product versus sales. My personal downfall was we got so head over heels into the product and the VR side that you realize, although that might be different than creating a 2D app, you're still building a business. It's still a business, and you need to have the sales expertise and the right connections. So I think that is something that most investors look for in VR right now.
Enterprise VR software there'll be a lot more to learn from enterprise 2D software than there will be from game dev, right? Because it's more about the domain, it's more about the customer. And so, you know, a successful company is always about the customer. And so that's really where it'll start. Who is this customer? What do they want to buy? How do they want to buy it? And that's where it all has to start.
Yep.
You talked there about like positioning, like how founders can position themselves from the sales side, from the enterprise side, from the technical side. For you, when you're hearing pitches from AR, VR founders, like what are your kind of top 3 bits of advice, or the key things that you're looking for when getting a pitch from an AR, VR founder?
So I think we're in a time where the market is pretty new, right? And so the 3 things I like to see are, one, do you have something that can work at the current or near future size of this market? I see a lot of pitches where, you know, it's like, well, assume everyone has lightweight AR glasses on their face, then this will be necessary. I believe that day will come, but I believe that day is like 7+ years out. And as a VC firm, we can't really invest for 7 years out. Honestly, you know, big tech can. So big tech, I mean, look, Apple's been working on the Vision Pro for 7 years, but we can't invest in something that doesn't have a mass market for 7 years, right? So there's got to be something that you can build that can succeed today or in the near future, like in 18 months, right? Second is building something that is compelling enough to put on the headset. And there's two reasons that you can put on the headset. One is because you want to, or one is because you have to. So if it's a game, it's got to be better than Candy Crush. Candy Crush works because it's like, I'm just like standing in line here at the grocery store, I'll play Candy Crush. But if you're going to put on the headset, I mean, it's a lot to do. You have to like get it. It's not charged. You're going to slip it on your face. Now you can't see anything. Now you like kind of look goofy to anyone who's in your house with you. It's a big ask to put on a headset. And so you have to have something that is either something that people really want to do, like something really fun or interesting, or like a company that we have called Inner World, which is doing cognitive behavioral therapy in VR. So something that you feel will really help you, or something you have to do. So either, for your work, you need to do your training, or you need to do this meeting. And so it's got to be either incredibly productive or incredibly fun. The bar is just much, much higher, and has specific things that you need to know. There's specific domain expertise from VR that you need to know, and you need to bring in the right experience. Otherwise, if you come at it, you could have something that looks really good in screenshots and then makes people throw up, right? And third is that you have to have a way to sell it. It's very, very hard to communicate anything about what a VR experience feels like in 2D. The Apple Vision Pro's video did the best job I've seen so far, but that was kind of a 2D. Their concept is a kind of 2D and 3D, so it's easier to represent in 3D. And I believe that might be one of the main reasons that they are starting with that, is that it's something that they can market. And they know, Apple knows that marketing is as important as product. And so when they design the product, they design it to be marketed and to be sold. So you have to think about how your product gets sold. Let's say you have something that can let people shop in VR for furniture. Okay, what's good? Like, how are you going to find that person and make them put on a headset? How are you going to show them the value of this? With gaming, you can often just put it in the store, hope that it, you can expect some kind of organic exposure from gaming just in the Quest store. You can't really do that in enterprise. And so with Arthur, the pricing, the business model, the target customer, they all work together, the product, they all work together to support a very high touch approach to getting people to try this. So if you're actually going to do an Arthur meeting, they do a pre-session beforehand to help you understand how to use VR, so that when you actually get into Arthur, you are successful from your first minute, right? So with each board member, they do a session before the board meeting where the Arthur representative helps you understand, hey, what is this VR thing? Okay, I realize I need to charge the headset, figure out all these details so that when all 10 people come together, they're ready to go from day one. So it's a business where the sales motion has been thought about way ahead of time. And I think that's what you got to do for all three. Those are the three things you got to do when you're starting a company. The fourth thing is exclusive to companies that are looking to raise VC, and that is to be building a business that can eventually do $100 million of revenue. I don't think it's important for every business to be a VC business, and there are many businesses in VR that are making a lot of money that people are getting extremely rich off of, that have never raised VC and will never raise VC. So I'm not implying that all startups need to raise VC, but those that do, need to be targeting a very large market. There's other writing you can look at for why the economics of the VC industry require that, but it's something that I think you have to kind of decide which path you're going to take, and one is not better than the other.
On that, you mentioned there in terms of like build something that can make revenue in 18 months. A lot of the kind of companies that we see in the space do have this kind of real vision for, oh, when everybody has VR or when everybody has AR headsets, and they're kind of building now towards that future and overlooking that short term. But how can founders for you who are build and be the big this future lives balance that with short-term revenue? Where are examples kind of in your own investment portfolio where you're seeing that balance as well?
I'd say Arthur is a great example, where VR is not ubiquitous, so they've targeted right now a very high value segment of the market, so that they're growing their revenues and they're making money by targeting a very high value, high willingness to pay segment where the value of the VR meeting is very high. These are for people who are on Fortune 500 boards, like their time is very valuable. They don't want to get on a flight if they don't have to. So if they can do every other board meeting in VR, that saves them, a lot of time and a lot of money, right? Is Arthur building towards a world where every, remote worker has a VR headset? Yes. But I think that the way you win that market is by winning a smaller segment of that market today. I think a company which is building something today that's only valuable when there's a huge installed base of headsets is going to be in a worse place, because they're not going to have that trajectory and that learning and the moat that they can build over time. So another example is Prisms, right? So VR is not widely used in schools today, but Prisms is actually getting the schools to adopt VR for the first time. And so, yes, their sales motion, their cost of customer acquisition is a lot higher than it would be if every school already had VR headsets and a big cart of them and charging, and they had a whole system in place. But the fact that they don't creates an opportunity, because Prisms can go and make that sale, and the first application that they will use with their students is Prisms, and that gives Prisms a kind of landing spot from which to expand, right?
But if that future doesn't arrive, would you say that those companies are still venture scale, or is that part of the kind of bet that you make in VC on that company?
So of course, these companies benefit from wider adoption of VR. If VR becomes more normalized in schools, that will benefit Prisms. If VR becomes more normalized in the enterprise, that will benefit Arthur. But in many ways, these companies are actually making that future happen. Anurupa is, driving a truckload, like a station wagon of VR headsets to a school, getting them to adopt it, just like bringing that future into existence. So
That's awesome.
so much as an external, like a thing that's happening externally. I think it's something that we look to invest in the founders who can kind of make that future happen. And of course, there's like exogenous factors, right? So without big tech essentially selling these VR headsets, a lot of these companies couldn't exist. I don't think the economics of most of these businesses would work if they had to go and sell their own VR headset. But this is a big platform shift, and the statistic that I like to cite is that, there's value in being super early on these platform shifts. So the iPhone 3G was the first iPhone with GPS, and Uber was founded 9 months after the release of the iPhone 3G. Now, they started with just black cabs, and it was expensive, and it was a small market. And you could say, hey, this isn't that big a market, black cabs in San Francisco. And it's like, yeah, but they're not going to stop with black cabs in San Francisco, right? So another is the front-facing camera on the iPhone 4. Instagram and Snapchat were both founded within a year of that front-facing camera. So when there's a platform shift like this with the Vision Pro, being an early winner is the best way to be a later winner, right? So that's why we are looking to companies who can build something today and not say, hey, there's only like 1,000, there's only like 100,000 front-facing cameras in the world. Well, yeah, there's only 100,000 front-facing cameras in the world today. So maybe get 50,000 of them using Snapchat. And then when there are, 2 billion front-facing cameras in the world, maybe 1 billion of them will be using Snapchat. So, so that's the way we think about it is, here's a big platform shift. We believe in it. We believe that it's going to continue to grow. And of course, we've believed in it for 10 years. It's great to see Apple come in and validate that belief. Because Apple doesn't make a lot of bets, right? And the bets that Apple makes are usually very successful. So that doesn't mean there's always a third-party platform to be built on it. I don't think there's any Instagram of AirPods, right? But I think that spatial computing is going to be different, and there's going to be a lot of third-party winners here.
So similar to a sommelier, they can smell a glass of wine and then tell you where it's from, which region. As an investor, you're basically a sommelier for entrepreneurs. So how do you categorize founders? How do you break down archetypes in your head? What are you looking for, and what do you try to maybe help but not invest in directly?
So I think that, so we talked about the things that we look for in a company,
Sure.
right?
Yep.
I think what we look for in a founder is just the ability to create that company. So we don't have all the signals, and we don't make, I wouldn't say we have a crystal ball or anything, but we look for some core reasons to believe that this founder can build this company. Is there a lot of domain expertise? Is there, a track record of success? Is there the ability to bring in other people on the team? So one thing we ask our founders is, who are okay, if we write a check today and you raise this round tomorrow, who are the first couple of people you're going to hire? Most founders have those names ready to go, right? Because they've been through their professional network, they know who are those great people who they want to build this company with. Okay, so we'll talk to that person and say, if we fund you, will you join this company? And so that's a great positive signal. So there's aspects of the founders and aspects of the company. I'd say it's the company is usually a reflection of the founder's vision. I mean, it's always a reflection of the founder's vision. So it's, do we believe that this company has what it takes, this founder has what it takes to achieve what they're going to say that they're going to achieve? And it's a very imprecise process. There's a lot of FOMO. We have to say no a lot more often than we can say yes. But I think one of the reasons that investors are so slow with our no's is that we're always trying to think, like we're always afraid that we're going to say no, and then that guy will go and build like $1 billion company, and we'll just be kicking ourselves saying, I knew we shouldn't have worried too much about that, and I knew that would have been. So it's not it's not something that is a precise process, but we do the best we can.
How does that diligence process work with you and Greg?
Because we're a small team, we're the two of us, we can move pretty quickly. So, usually there'll be a first meeting with one of us. If it's something that we're very eager to move forward on, we'll do a second meeting pretty soon. And then we use our network to do a lot of the diligence as well. One of the benefits of having invested in this space for so long is that we have a lot of contacts here who can help us say, does this make sense? This founder is building for this market. Does that make sense to you based on what you've seen in this other similar market? It's usually a pretty quick process, 2 weeks from first meeting to our kind of decision, which we then go into the more deeper diligence phase where we go and check references and things like that. But overall, it's a pretty quick process because it's just the two of us. We don't have to go run this by an investment committee. We just need to both get on board.
You must be loving it.
It's great. I mean, I feel extremely fortunate to be doing this because of the founders that I get to work with. It's not, there's very few jobs where you get to routinely meet and work with people, so many different people at this level of capability, right? So if you work in Google Brain, like obviously, like everyone there is super competent, but it's the same group of people, right? Here it's just like so many dozens and hundreds and thousands of people that you end up interfacing with, and all of them are super impressive. I mean, honestly, it's a lot of our no's are very tough no's. It's tough to get to that because just a ton of the people we meet are super impressive. So I think there's a ton of fantastic people working in this industry, and this industry kind of has the excitement of the early people working on the internet, or the early people working on cloud, or the early people working on mobile. I wasn't involved in it, but like maybe the early people working in like crypto, like just that there's a sense that the future is limitless, right? So
you talk there about network kind of reference checks that you do with founders, and I'm based out in London, and the VR scene here is pretty different to San Francisco. But even through our newsletter now, we're meeting founders from all over the world, and sometimes I'll look at like domain signups and I'll see that it's like a VR company in Chile or like South Africa or something, and they don't necessarily have the network at all in Silicon Valley, or not even London. And so how do founders like that, who have these big visions or a really great product, get in front of VCs like you to an extent where you can reference check that team, where you can validate them as a team and as a company? Or is it just currently that geography is still this inherent disadvantage?
There are inherent advantages to geography. I'll not deny that, but I think it is easier today than perhaps ever before to overcome, or not overcome, I would say, to to network with people in different geographies, right? Because now, even with people in San Francisco, our first meetings are usually remote meetings, right? So everyone's coming in on the same point. Now, I think that it is definitely the case that people for whom we see common touch points in our network, it's easier to make an investment in someone where there are introductions or relationships that are existing, because there's so much of information gap between, you know, in a totally cold meeting. But I think that it's also more possible than ever before to network with other people and build those relationships, right? Um, when people say, oh, you need an intro, it's not like um, the princess of like the Netherlands needing to a letter of reference from the Count of Normandy for their ambassador or something like that.
Yeah.
These are things that you can actually, you don't need to be born into this stuff. You can make it happen yourself, right? And
So
and
how do you advise they do that? So if I'm a founder from, South America or
yeah,
somewhere else in the world, how do I do that with Anorak, for example?
right. I would not look at it so tactically as how would you do that with Anorak, um, because the time it takes uh, and the value that it provides wouldn't match. I think it is longer term. How do I build my network in the global scene of founders, investors, engineers, researchers who are working in the areas that I want to work in? Now, I think that Twitter has traditionally been a very great place to do this. Twitter is obviously in a place of great turmoil right now. So it's not clear, it's not clear which direction Twitter is going to go from here. So could make you could find yourself investing a lot in building those relationships and then have the product essentially fall apart. But I think it's been very powerful to date, uh, because and you got to bring original thoughts to the table, right? And so you you can look at what's out there and publish your thinking and get it in front of people, write something interesting and like DM it to Scoble and like see if he likes it, um, uh, there's there's um, there's a lot of different ways to form like to communicate with people today, um, and you got to take advantage of them. And you can't think of it as like a something to do in 4 weeks, something to do in 4 years, right? So uh, to be always, um, reading, responding, communicating with this global network of people doing this stuff, and some of that, a lot of that can happen on Twitter. Some of it can happen in person in events and things like that. If
And newsletters.
newsletters, right? So if you're, and it's different because if you're in Chicago, it's very different than if you're in, you know, um, like Antarctica, right? So there are opportunities you can, and so if you're in Antarctica or somewhere really remote, you'll need to do more of this stuff online. If you're somewhere like Chicago, okay, it's not San Francisco, it's not New York, but there's a lot of things you can do in person in Chicago, and so I think it kind of depends on your individual circumstances, but I think there's just a lot of opportunity to communicate with people. I think it's just you not got to make sure that you're bringing something original, and something valuable to people. So there's like a lot of those, Twitter threads that just don't have any content in them. I'm not sure how far that'll get you. I don't think just kind of like, I don't think just summarizing and re-outputting stuff is going to get you very far. I think it is seeing what people are saying and thoughtfully responding and engaging with them and starting conversations with them. Um, and then it's okay. I've been talking to you on Twitter for, a year back and forth, and then and you always seem to have really interesting things to say. So of course, like I'm gonna want to learn more. So yeah, I think those are some of the ways you can do it. You know, a network is something you can create, and it's not something that you have to kind of inherit. And honestly, you know, it's the one that you create is more powerful. If someone's introduced to me as saying, this person, worked at Google and Facebook and Tesla versus this person, is consistently one of the most interesting thinkers about this area. That second person is more, comes with more compelling of a introduction.
I'll add one more tip to that, Lori, because this is something that's helped me a lot. And we just interviewed Ariane from Earthling VC Amal, and he said this as well. Within the VR industry, there are clear believers, and your job is to find those believers. Your conversion rate of getting a response is 10x if you can message someone that believes in the future of VR. And so you shouldn't really waste time just sending a bunch of cold messages. Focus those messages on the believers, people like yourself, people like ourselves, and go from there.
Yep, but I would say that you do have to also have a way of converting the non-believer, because that's the actual job, right? Of being a founder. The job of a founder is not to raise VC. The job of a founder is to get customers. And most customers out there are non-believers right now. And so you can find people who are more open to new ideas for sure. Like, you should not, if you're pioneering a new way of working, you should not start with like the US State Department. You should start with, a growth stage company in the Bay Area, right? So you can target your energy more effectively, but ultimately, your company starts out with people who are non-believers, and so you do have to find a way of getting someone's attention quickly and converting them. You need to, in 10 seconds, give them a reason to listen to you for 30 seconds. And in 30 seconds, you need to give them a reason to listen to you for 10 minutes. And in 10 minutes, you have to give them a reason to, sit down for a real conversation.
Awesome advice. Well, this was a very good, real conversation. Can you leave the listeners with how they can contact you, and maybe just what are some things that you're most interested to see right now? And I know you don't like the specifics. It's more about, the general. Are you building a business with those three things? But even if you want to reiterate, that'd be great.
Sure. So you can contact me, Amal at anorak.vc. Don, maybe you can put that up in the description.
Yep.
Or you can find me on Twitter at Amal Darai, and DM me there. We are looking to meet founders in any area of emerging technology, so not just VR, AR, also anything related to 3D software. A lot of the technology underpinning that, 3D e-commerce, AR e-commerce. We have some investments in this space. And then also anything that interfaces with the physical world. So there's computer vision, sensing, AI, robotic, advanced manufacturing. We do hardware investments. We're not afraid of hardware. The path to success in hardware is much narrower, and you do need more experience to win there. So you don't see any hardware companies like pivot 4 times and then become like $1 billion company. So we invest in all areas of emerging technology. We invest $250,000 to $500,000 checks at the earliest stage, so pre-seed or early seed rounds. And we're looking, again, we don't have a specific idea of, this is what our vision of this should look like. That's the founder's job. They're the ones who are building the world that we're going to live in. But people building big companies, people looking to build, generationally successful companies, people who have the right background or capabilities to build those companies, and people who have a path to success or a path to traction that where they have a way that they can sell it, and they have a market they can sell to, and they have a customer that they understand that's ready to buy. And yeah, so if that describes you, then please get in touch.
And I'll just say one thing I've noticed in the past hour of speaking with you, because you were a founder, you're clearly founder first, very founder friendly. Just even the way you talk about it's their vision, and we're just here to kind of service that. So I think you'd be an awesome person to have on the cap table. And Lori and I give 2 thumbs up of approval for Anorak and Amal.
Okay, I appreciate that. And thank
Absolutely.
you for everything you've done in the industry so far, Don. You've been in here much longer than I have, so.
We try. Awesome. Well,